Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming. We're about to get started. So the event here is Live Free and Learn, Education Freedom, the New Hampshire Way. We're going to have Kate Baker Demers speak, and then after we'll have a panel. So just some information about Kate. She's the Executive Director of the Children's Scholarship Fund, New Hampshire. Kate is a leader in the Granite States Education Freedom Movement. She has worked tirelessly for more than 2 decades on behalf of New Hampshire children, driving the implementation and growth of 2 charter schools, New Hampshire's Education Tax Credit Scholarship Program and Education Freedom Account Program. Kate is a member of the Board of Trustees of Catholic Charities, New Hampshire, board member of the Rotary Club of Concord, and is an appointee of Governor Sununu to the New Hampshire Council for Thriving Children. She previously served as the union leader and New Hampshire Business Industry Association as 40 Under 40, the state's brightest young achievers. And though her work with Children's Scholarship Fund, thousands of children now have the education that is the right for them to thrive. So, without further ado, come on up.
I love that the stairs are blocked. Make me jump. Yep. Hi, everybody. I'm Kate Baker Demers, Executive Director of Children's Scholarship Fund, and I just want to take a minute and dedicate this session to former Senator Jim Forsyth, because we wouldn't be here without him. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of background. You're having trouble hearing me? You're making an ear sound. Okay, we'll take this off here.
Make sure the mic is close.
Yeah, that's better. I can handle it. Yeah. Mic trained. Thank you for that note. Yeah. The last thing you want to do is talk to a room of people for the entire time and they can't hear you, especially when you're me, like the kind of person who doesn't need a microphone at all. So there's that, right? So I was talking for a minute about Senator Forsyth, who passed away yesterday. And in 2012, it was actually 2008, I think you were there, Michelle, when we started Parents for Educational Freedom in my living room with Senator Forsyth. Is there anyone here in this room besides Michelle who was in that living room? Were you there, Jody? No. So Jim Forsyth, me, Michelle, and some other people started New Hampshire Parents for Educational Freedom in 2008 in my living room, and that was kind of the beginning of this. We had all just come off kind of helping with that first Ron Paul campaign, and we were very acutely aware about the environment and that kids needed freedom. And from that point, I went on to start a couple of schools, to help parent groups start schools. And what I realized in starting those schools is that people couldn't afford to pay. So for the first school that we worked on, this parent group and myself, was a private school. And we had the problem of people wanted to come there, but they couldn't afford the $8,000 tuition. And so that was kind of my first inclination that there was a problem to solve. Next thing that happened is that school closed. The school became a charter school, and I sat as the board chair of that charter school for 3 years. And I don't know how much you know about charter schools, but they're by lottery for entrance, meaning we use these merciless bingo balls to give away the seats in the school. So there'd be 100 kids that would apply, and there might be 20 seats available. So 20 kids would get into this charter school, and 80 kids would cry. And I watched this happen time after time, right? 3 years of being the board chair, to the point where I was like, this is just like, who's helping the rest of these kids, right? I knew that it was just like a money problem, and money is kind of a problem you can solve, right? At the same time, Senator Forsyth was in the legislature, and he had this idea, this education tax credit idea. And he told me about it. And he said, what do you think about this? And I said, listen, if you can do that, if you can get that passed, I'll help you. I'll work on it. And he said, okay. And then he started to work on it. I thought for sure it would never fly, honestly, because it's kind of weird. So a business or an individual can make a donation to the scholarship fund. they can subtract that from their taxes. They can use a credit. It's an 85% credit. So I'll just take a sidebar here and say if anyone's paying business enterprise or business profits tax or interest in dividends tax in the room, you don't have to do that anymore. You can give it to us and we'll give it to kids. So I thought for sure it wouldn't pass because, again, it was a Democrat governor at the time, a Republican House and a Republican Senate. So it passes the House, it passes the Senate. Governor Lynch at the time vetoes it. And so I think, okay, great, I'm off the hook. Well, no. It was the Bill O'Brien legislature at the time. Who in this room was in that legislature? Dan was there. Anyone else in this room in that Bill O'Brien legislature? No, nobody. So they ended up overriding the governor's veto. And this whole time I kept asking Jim Forsythe, like, what's going to happen when this thing passes? Like, what are we even going to do? And he convinced me to quit my job and start the scholarship fund at that time. So I quit my job and I started the scholarship fund. He actually then also introduced me to people who would donate to the startup, which, you don't know. I mean, I was running my friend's software company. Before that, I had worked on the school stuff. Like, I'm not a wealthy person that just has money to throw around. So I needed people to fund the startup. So he introduced me to people who made donations to the startup. And so again, without Jim Forsythe, I'm not sure that any of us, including me, would even be here working on giving kids educational opportunities in New Hampshire. I'm not sure education freedom would exist at all without him. And so I just want to take a minute and just a moment of silence for former Senator Jim Forsythe. Okay, thanks so much. It's so challenging for me to just be here and talk with you about that. Even just, it was only, he passed away, not even 24 hours ago. And I know he would have been here with us, right? I probably would have forced him to be on my panel that I'm going to do the second half of this talk if he was here with us. As a matter of fact, if you have him, you don't even need me. And so there's that, right? And so, hats off to him. I remember he was in the Senate. Once the education tax credit program passed, he said, I'm not going to run again, Kate. And of course I was like, oh my gosh, I can't stand it. I need you there, to preserve the program. And he said, no, that was all I really wanted to do. Now I feel like I accomplished my goal. And I'm not sure he even kind of knew where everything would go from there. And so I'm talking about now, we were in 2012. So 2013, January was the first day that we could become a scholarship organization, working with that tax credit that I explained. And so I was there, January 2nd. Of course, they were closed on January 1st. So January 2nd, filing the application to be the scholarship organization on day one. And I think that I thought I was starting the scholarship organization just to help families and kids, right? Remember, I had come from this background where, I had the support group of parents, I had the schools that I had worked on, and I really wanted to help kids. I don't think I realized that this was even controversial at all back then. And so I filed to be the scholarship organization and start raising money. And then all of a sudden, someone sued the state, saying that this education tax credit program was unconstitutional. And it floored me. I had no idea. I was like, what? And it was the teachers unions and the ACLU who sued the state saying that this was unconstitutional. So then I suddenly became now I had to talk about it all the time, and I was embroiled in this, court battles, and that lasted until about 2014. So the lower court actually did rule that we couldn't allow families to get the scholarship and choose a religious school. And the lower court ruled that. And so we weren't able to do that. They made me discriminate against families. We know that's discriminate against people's views. So they made me discriminate against families for that whole year. It went to the New Hampshire Supreme Court, and the New Hampshire Supreme Court did throw it out on standing. They said that the people who filed the case, couldn't show that they were harmed in any way. The U.S. Supreme Court has also ruled on these issues, saying that, thank goodness, money in your pocket is actually yours. Okay? If you donate it to someone and you use a deduction or credit, it doesn't actually make it someone else's money. Okay, so we were glad for that. But the Supreme Court then ruled that the lower court was wrong, through that mechanism. And then we were able to begin helping kids all over the state. At that time, that year that we were in the court battle, there was about 50 kids in the program. So then we were running for 2 more years. It was just me getting people to donate and helping the kids. I kind of was doing it on a spreadsheet, because it only had 50 or 100 children, and you can do scholarship distribution on a spreadsheet when it's that small. After about 3 years, the people who were donating so that I could do this work were starting to get a little donor fatigue. We can't blame them, right? It had gone on 3 years where it was still tiny and controversial. And they said, you got to figure out a way to make this sustainable so that we're not just, paying you to live or whatnot. And then they basically left me. So I was by myself and had no more operating support, and still was only raising about $200,000. This is my full-time job, just so you know. Okay, I quit my job to do this, so I was an employee of the organization at the time. The legislature, when they did the tax credit, said that we could use 10% for administrative costs. But you can imagine, of $220,000, 10% is $20,000. Okay, so it wasn't really enough to actually survive on while I was doing the work, and so I had to find another way. So now we're at about 2015-16. At that point, we had still about 200 kids in the program. It was, getting closer, a little bit over $200,000, and I went to New York to ask Children's Scholarship Fund National to help me, and I didn't know what would happen. I just went there and I was like, this is a tiny thing in New Hampshire. I don't know how I'm going to make it sustainable. If I don't get help, I'm going to starve to death doing this work. And so I was a single mom at the time too. What a nut. Who does that? Who does that? Okay? So they said, okay, well, we don't quite know how we can help you, but maybe we could hire you. Would you want us to hire you? They said, if we did that, we could do your back end, and all you would do is fundraising. And I said, yes. And the people who were on my board at the time thought I was out of my mind. They were like, you are insane. They're like, you're going to give away your whole thing to... And I said to them, I am here to help children, not to hold all the cards. I don't need to be the one that it makes all the decision, is in charge. Just let me help kids. That's why I started this thing. So I jumped on board with Children's Scholarship Fund in 2016, and then we really started cooking. So in that year, it was about $600,000 that we raised. And then the next year, it was $900,000. And then the next year, it was $1.2 million. And that was about 650, bordering on 700 kids that we were helping in New Hampshire. And so I thought, okay, now we're getting somewhere, right? Again, beyond that building, right? Remember, I was sitting in that building thinking, how do I help more kids? Finally, it started working. And then you'll remember what happened. Does everyone remember what happened at the that 2020, March of 2020? Yeah. All right, so then it's freaking pandemic, right? And everything shuts down. And I did the insane thing, which is keep working, right? Don't stop, keep working. And so I just kept answering my telephone. I was not an essential worker, technically, but I just kept, I think actually nonprofits, 501c3 charities were probably considered essential. I didn't give a whether I was essential or not. I mean, whatever. So I kept working. I know, right? Can you even imagine? So I kept working and kept answering my telephone. At that point, we had given away our $1.2 million that we had raised to those 650 kids. And I just kept answering my phone. I thought I was, making a difference. So I just kept answering my phone at that point. And it was people that now needed scholarships. It was, the delivery drivers, right, who had to go and drive those, Coca-Cola trucks that filled the coolers in the grocery store, and people had to drive the food to the grocery store so we could still go buy it. The people calling me were the LNAs working in the nursing homes, right, people that had to go to work every day. They could not stay home like me in my ivory tower working remotely in my dining room, right? They couldn't do that. They had to go in person to work. It was people with special needs children who were trying to be taught remotely and being injured. And so I remember a mom calling me that summer and telling me that she had a special needs child who got occupational therapy, and they were trying to do the occupational therapy on the computer with the child, and the kid was falling out of the chair onto the ground. Okay, so it was just too much. Like I couldn't take it. So I kept telling these people to apply anyway, even though I had no money. Okay, I had given away the money, and I'm sitting there, I'm telling them to apply anyway. And they're doing it, they're continuing to apply. Well, it gets to the point where I had 600 kids that I'd helped, which is a lot of stinking kids. 600 kids is a lot of stinking kids. We had helped a lot of kids. Our usual wait list in every given year was like 30 kids, okay? After this, the wait list was 800 kids that we couldn't help with scholarships, that were these people who were desperate because they needed to go to work. They needed their kids to go somewhere that was open, right? So that they could, and the private schools were open. I don't know if you remember that, but the private schools were open. The Prendapods and micro schools were starting up at that time. And there were places for these kids to go, but not if you didn't have money, okay? And not if you just were planning to go to your local public school, all right? So, you know, Corey DeAngelis, who works for the American Federation for Children, makes a joke. He says Randy Weingarter did more for the school choice movement by keeping the schools closed than anything. But that was the most difficult summer of my life. I remember, so just for a little background, okay? So I was a poor kid. So I grew up on the west side of Manchester. I remember doing my college FAFSA, not because anyone did college prep with me, but because some kids at my school were going to college, and I thought, well, what are they doing? I should probably do it too. And so I would start applying to schools like late after everybody, and I had to collect my parents' income to do the FAFSA. And I remember their income at the time was $20,000. Okay, so I was a free and reduced lunch kid from the west side of Manchester. My mom worked at the grocery store. My dad worked at the jail. And I was standing there that summer when the schools were closed, and I thought to myself, you know, I babysat my brother and sister for like my entire life, okay? You can tell I'm an eldest child just by talking to me. So, you know, I babysat my brother my entire life. And I thought to myself, okay, if the schools were closed right now, I would be there at my house with my brother and sister in tow, and I'd have to watch those freaking maniacs. I mean, they're related to me. They're like practically animals, okay? So I would have to watch them and probably be teaching them, because the Manchester School District was driving on buses packets of paper and dropping it off at kids' houses. That was their idea of remote learning. And I was so mad. I was like, you know, that kind of outrage that just sears up in you, where you're thinking like, this is just an untenable situation. That, so you know, I had been doing this tax credit thing forever, and I told you how controversial it was, right? So the legislature tried to eliminate a whole bunch of times, and I had been spending a lot of time in the legislature talking to them to make sure this stayed in place, right? This whole time, from 2012 all the way to where we were in 2020. So I had a few friends in the legislature at that point, right? I mean, just by accident, really, from hanging around there. So I called one of my friends in the legislature, Representative Hinch, who was the Speaker of the House at the time, and honestly, I was yelling at him, okay? Because I was so angry that they were paying closed buildings, right? So I knew there was money that these families could get access to, and that they were literally paying it to closed buildings. And I was like, dude, you're paying closed buildings. Like, let the families have access to that money, because they're on the street and they can't get anything. like the poor guy probably thought I was like literally from hell, okay? Because I was so outraged about what was happening to these. That would have been me. That would have been me. Like, I would have been on the street with my little brother and sister, who are so annoying, and educating them with a packet from the school. I was like, this is outrageous. Let that money follow the child. Let them have access to it right now, right? I mean, come on, what are we doing? So that's how we got here. I mean, he was probably so terrified that he had to say, yeah, okay, Kate, okay. it wasn't the first time we had discussed it, okay? And I can't say that all of it is because of that conversation, all right? It was already things that we had been discussing in New Hampshire for quite a while. I mean, Representative Cordelli, for example, who's not here today, like carried the water on this thing for so long. People thought he was just crazy. They were like, you're crazy, man. And he would just say over and over again, you know, this money should just follow the child. Why are we just, you know, it's the money that could go to a public school or go to a charter school, but then it just stopped there. Like, why does it just stop there? Isn't there some way that we can make this available to people to use it since it's their own stinking money, their own education funding? And so that conversation had been going on for a while. And so they did, it went through the House, right? It actually kind of failed in the House. Would you guys retain it in House Education? You retained it in House Education. Then they passed it in the Senate. And then there was this whole just disaster area of monkeys throwing poop at the wall, where finally, you know, it passed in the budget and it became law. And then that first year, literally 2,000 families applied and got their kids' stinking education funding, which they should have been able to get anyway. And now they're in the Education Freedom Account program. And so I'm just going to add now, you know, that's kind of the background. Again, thanks to Jim Forsyth. If you're a legislator in this room, can you just raise your hand? Yeah, thanks to the legislators in this room who carry all the water. If you're in this room and you've testified before the legislature, can you raise your hand? Who's gone there and testified? Yeah, I mean, everybody. Like, I had somebody say to me the other day, somebody was introducing me to someone, and they were like, Kate, single-handedly, and I just cut them off. I was like, single-handedly? Like, what, are you kidding me? Like, that's nearly impossible, number one. Single-handedly is it's the opposite of single-handedly. It's so many people doing so many things, you know, all over the state to be able to make sure that we have freedom. There's some things about our program in New Hampshire that are different than other states. So in some places you might hear that, education freedom is scary, or that, you shouldn't do this kind of thing because you're going to get government involved. Well, our legislators are really stinking smart, first of all, in New Hampshire. And I don't want to be weird, but I'm from here. Okay, I'm from New Hampshire. I didn't even move here. I'm just from here. I mean, I do think that we're smarter than everyone else, just number one, okay? They also, every one of our state legislators has that kind of freedom as the underpinnings, right? And so they did some things that were really intelligent. For example, the grant goes to the family, but that's how the family pays us to do the work. And so there's no budget line item that pays us to do the work. It's a piece of the family's grant, which means that we're beholden to them. So the families in the program are my customer, and I have to do what they say, right? And so that mechanism was really smart that the legislature did that to make sure that the accountability rests in the right place with the families. So I really appreciated that. The other thing they did was tell a nonprofit to run it instead of the state. And so in some states, the programs like this are run by the state themselves, and it works, but they're not quite as agile as a nonprofit can be. For example, when the state has to hire an employee, it sometimes takes a year to get through that process. But if a charity has to hire an employee, we can just hire them. And so there was a few things like that the New Hampshire legislature did that were kind of distinct from other states in general, that I think make the programs that we run and that we have here accountable really to the citizens themselves, right? The families that are participating in the program. And so that was really cool, I thought. So now I'm just going to pivot to having some more people participate in this discussion. And so, yeah, I love to talk to you. So Brandon Bach is here, and she's a mom who participates in the Education Freedom Account, and so she's going to join us up here. And then Eowyn Osborne is also going to join us up here, just so that you can get a perspective from a student and a parent, and not just me talking at you the whole time, because it's not that exciting to hear from me. I just do work. Anyway, so thank you guys for joining me. I'm going to come and sit with you there.
Hello.
So Brandon, I just want to start with you, okay?
Okay.
Down at the end. And so I would like you to talk about just a little bit about your family and your experience kind of before you had this resource available, like before you had an Education Freedom account, and then just paint for us a picture of, you know, the after, kind of the before and after. And I know that's kind of deep, but give it a shot.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. I'll try to keep it short. So my name is Brandon. My family has 5 children, 17 down to 3. 4 are recipients of the EFA. This is our 12th year homeschooling, so we are not new to it. Thank you. I appreciate that. So we have a senior this year. So we moved here from Alabama in July, and so most of our homeschooling took place outside of New Hampshire without an EFA. Before that, homeschooling, a large family, was always done on a budget. Not that the children ever went without, but it was definitely, okay, you get to choose one, art or guitar. And so since moving to New Hampshire, it's definitely been an experience where we can say yes more than we have to say no. I feel like the opportunities are varied, and they get to try new things. Like we have a 12-year-old named Isla, and she's always been really interested in pottery. And you know, in the past, maybe I would have picked up one of those plastic pottery wheels on Amazon for, you know, $30 or something like that. But since moving and having that money allotted to her every semester?
Yeah, it comes September.
Disbursements,
Yeah,
September.
it's the same. So the way the funding mechanism works is the grant is funded exactly the way they fund public schools and charter schools in New Hampshire. And so they make a small deposit in September, and then November, and then January, and then April. So it just looks like the same as if, you know, if you were in a public school, that's how that money would go to the public school or the charter school, and now it just goes into your EFA.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you for explaining that. So whenever she gets her disbursement, you know, she gets to choose, okay, well, I want to do this or I want to try that. So she's been taking pottery from an actual teacher, and she's been really enjoying it. And she actually asked me, Mom, can I go on Amazon and buy an actual pottery wheel? I was like, maybe, let's try it. And so she actually got a pottery wheel, so she's able to practice at home. So that's been probably the biggest change in our homeschool, is that we've been actually able to let the kids try different things, to take live classes and things that they're interested in, buy better curriculum, better manipulatives, and it's just made a profound impact on the way that we're able to educate our children at home.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And so, Eowyn, I would just want to go to you because you know a lot of children who have needed this, who have needed to be able to make choices based on their own experiences that they had. And so I'm wondering if you could just share with the group you know, like a story of one of your friends who, you know, needed school choice so that they can understand what this means to a student.
All right, well,
Nice and close.
all right, can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, I remember a specific story from, she's one of my best friends, and up until, I think, the year 2021, I want to say, she was in the public school system. And I remember hearing stories from her about how she was severely bullied. She's never treated very nicely by her fellow students, or her teachers for that matter. I remember her telling me that she'd go report, you know, the actions of her fellow students to the administration, and they wouldn't do anything about it. Then 2020 hit, and she was forced to go do school online, which, you know, was horrible for her mental health. And in 2021, she finally started coming to my mom's learning center, Latitude Learning Resources, for those who are not aware. And ever since then, she's just been slowly improving. Her mental state has improved significantly. She has friends, she has hobbies. She's not living in constant fear of being bullied by her fellow students, and it's just great to see.
Thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
So, Brandon, I'm wondering if you have one particular child, you know, yes, we know that, your kid is doing the ceramics curriculum and so had the pottery wheel. But I'm wondering if there's one child in your family who you think this is the most important for.
Oh, absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about that.
So our only son out of 5 children, his name is Ezra. Oh, now everyone can hear me.
There you go. Do it.
So he's 6 years old, and he's doing kindergarten this year, and he's the most amazing child. He has been babied his entire life, having all these sisters. And he actually started reading on his own at 3 years old.
Wow.
We never taught him.
Wow.
But he started speaking the same week. And it's just the oddest thing, but he has a speech impediment. And one of the things that we're able to do with our education funding is to get him speech therapy, which I think is so cool. And we don't have to do it through a school system.
Right.
So that to me, I think, is the biggest takeaway for us, for our family.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
And Eowyn, you're so articulate in this discussion. I've seen you testify. Can you just talk to me a little bit about why you feel so passionate about this and why you take the time to go to Concord and talk to the legislators? I mean, just, give us your pitch for why this needs to exist just in general.
Well,
Close.
just hearing from my friends about everything they went to in the public school system, seeing firsthand what is experienced there. I took one math class at my local public school, last fall. And even just from that one class, seeing the environment in which these kids are forced to live in, I was hearing on the daily about people getting into fights, people overdosing. Both the girls I sat with at my table, they had severe mental issues and both had done time in the mental institution. And on top of that, half the kids in my class couldn't write a good sentence. This was high school sophomores. And I think kids deserve a better education than that. They shouldn't have to go through the indoctrination and the mistreatment, and shouldn't have to deal with faculty who doesn't actually care about them and is just there to get paid.
Yeah.
That's why I go.
Yep, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough,
Yes.
Eowyn. So there are some kind of interesting things, a couple more interesting things about the way the New Hampshire legislature designed our the Education Freedom Program. So we talked first about the Education Tax Credit Program, right, how people donate and it's private money. So that actually was the first school choice program in the nation that included homeschoolers. And so it was kind of the precursor to people thinking about unbundling, meaning people choosing multiple things, right, and not just going just to a building. And so we're moving towards this kind of rethink of education is kind of a move towards not being in just one building, but possibly being able to go to multiple places, right? We know that kind of learning happens everywhere, right? And so you might go to different places for different things. You can use your Education Freedom account if you want to pay a public school, say for their AP classes or an extracurricular activity that they have. And so to us, it's not really either or, and I understand your friends had challenging situations, but really seeing our neighborhood public schools as an option that a family might choose if that's what works for them, right? And so you might say to yourself, like, there's a district 2 towns away who has a particularly good STEM program that, you want to participate in. You can then take your Education Freedom account and pay that other district if you wanted to participate. And I think the important thing there to take away is that, it's the parent and the student in the driver's seat, and they might choose a public option if they want to use that, but they're not trapped there. Instead, they now are in the driver's seat making these choices. So one of the last things I want to do is, can you just share with everyone, Eowyn, the different places that you go? Okay, so for example, tell them what unbundling, we call it unbundling, meaning going to different places to get different subjects or different topics. Can you just explain to them what that looks like in real life? Like, what are you doing right now?
All right, well, this is just what I do. It's in no way the experience that every homeschooler has, but as of right now, I do 2 days at my mom's homeschool center. I do 2 days where I take an astronomy class at Manchester Community College. And that's been really, really useful so far. Last semester, I did 1 class at my local public school. It was statistics, and for what I don't get at home, I just do on my own. Like, I'll go on the OpenStax website, download a textbook, and I'll just teach myself what I want to learn. I do voice lessons through a place near us, all sorts of things.
So that's kind of what it looks like, okay, when we're talking about this kind of education rethink, is putting, parents and kids, when you're a teenager, you kind of can direct it yourself, right? Putting them in the driver's seat, saying, these are the best possible options for me. I'm going to make my education be all of those things rather than go to a building. And so what we've noticed, and this kind of leads to our next panel also, where we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but what we've noticed is that somebody might come to us and begin by finding a different school that they like, right? They might come to us because of an emergency. So say you have a bullied kid or they're facing some sort of discrimination in the school. They come to us and they get the scholarship and the education freedom account. They might start out by choosing one building and just choosing a different building. But then over time, they start to look more and more like what Aowen is doing, where they now have their grant and they're saying to themselves, what is the ideal scenario for my child in each subject area, in each environment, and how are they going to thrive? And I can't really think of anything that screams freedom more than that. So thank you all for coming. If you hang around, we'll have another panel starting here shortly. Thanks so much.
Thank you.